The stars looked different here in the deep space around Nexus Prime, and Captain Jake Morrison knew why. The massive alien station blocked out half the view from the bridge of the UHS Defiance, making everything seem darker and more dangerous than it really was. Jake stood at the main viewport watching the enormous structure grow larger as they approached, and he had seen many alien buildings before, but nothing quite like this one. It stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, with towers and rings and strange geometric shapes that hurt his eyes to look at too long. Behind him, Dr. Lisa Grant was checking her equipment for the third time in the past hour, and she was nervous, which was normal since this was probably the most important meeting in human history. Colonel Ryan Hayes stood near the communications console, looking calm as always, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. The comm system crackled to life, and an alien voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect English, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had spoken in its own language. "Human vessel, you will dock at Bay 749 and proceed to Council Chamber Alpha immediately upon arrival." Jake nodded to his pilot, who began the docking sequence, and within minutes they felt the soft thump that meant they were connected to the station. The three humans gathered their things and walked to the airlock, where they were met by two tall blue-skinned aliens wearing flowing robes. The Zephyrians were beautiful in an otherworldly way, with large silver eyes and graceful movements, but Jake knew better than to be fooled by their appearance. These beings could read minds and had been the Council's primary enforcers for thousands of years. They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, with walls that shifted color as they passed, and Jake wondered if this was meant to impress visitors or just confuse them. Lisa whispered that the architecture was designed to make other species feel small and insignificant, which seemed to be working. The council chamber was a massive dome with 12 raised platforms arranged in a circle, and on each platform sat a different alien species representing the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Jake had studied each one, but seeing them in person was different. The Zephyrian speaker stood first, and his voice echoed through the chamber without any visible amplification system. "Humans of the species designation Homo sapiens, you have been summoned to answer for your crimes against galactic order." Jake stepped forward as planned and kept his voice steady. "We come in peace to discuss any concerns the Council may have about human expansion." The speaker's silver eyes seemed to glow brighter, and Jake felt a strange pressure in his head, which he knew meant the alien was trying to read his thoughts. "Your expansion has been noted and found to be aggressive and threatening to established territorial boundaries." On another platform, something that looked like a living crystal began to speak, and its voice sounded like breaking glass. "The species known as humans have colonized 47 worlds in the past 50 years, without seeking proper authorization from this council." Jake wanted to point out that none of those worlds had been claimed by anyone else, but he stayed quiet and let the aliens continue their speech. A massive insect creature clicked and chittered before a translation device made its words understandable. "The hive queens of Kepler find human behavior to be chaotic and unpredictable, which threatens the stability our species have worked to maintain for millennia." Lisa shifted beside him, and Jake knew she was thinking the same thing he was. These aliens were afraid of humans not because they were dangerous, but because they were different. The established order these species talked about was really just their way of staying in control. The crystalline being that Jake now recognized as Council Speaker Vextar rose to its full height of nearly 10 feet, and the chamber fell silent. "Therefore, the Galactic Governance Council hereby issues the following ultimatum to the human species." Jake felt his heart rate increase, but kept his expression neutral as Vextar continued. "All human presence beyond the Sol system must cease. Within one standard galactic year, approximately 18 Earth months, all colonies must be abandoned and all vessels must return to Earth space." The silence that followed was deafening, and Jake could hear his own breathing, which seemed too loud in the vast chamber. Ryan stepped forward slightly, which was the signal they had agreed on if things went badly. "Furthermore," Vextar continued, "any attempt to resist this directive will result in the combined military forces of the Council taking action to ensure compliance. The human species will be confined to their system of origin for a period of no less than 500 years. Jake cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the chamber. "The United Earth government will need time to consider this ultimatum and consult with our colonial populations. A sound like static electricity filled the air, and Jake realized it was laughter coming from the gaseous creature on one of the platforms. There is nothing to consider human. The council has spoken and the decision is final. The mechanical beings known as the Synthesis Collective spoke in perfect unison. Compliance is not optional, resistance is futile. Your species lacks the capability to oppose 12 advanced civilizations. Jake nodded slowly and made a show of looking defeated, which wasn't hard since the situation was exactly as bad as they had expected it to be. We request permission to return to Earth to deliver your message to our government. Vextar's crystalline head tilted in what might have been approval. You have 7 days to depart council space, after which time your vessel will be destroyed, if found within our territory. The 3 humans were escorted back to their ship in silence, and once the airlock sealed behind them, Jake allowed himself to relax slightly. They were alive and they had the information Earth needed to make the next move. Lisa was already at the communications console setting up the encrypted channel while Ryan secured the bridge. Jake sat in his captain's chair and composed the message. That would change everything. Admiral Sullivan. This is Morrison reporting from Nexus Prime. The Council has issued their ultimatum exactly as predicted. They want all humans out of space within 18 months, and they're threatening military action if we refuse. He paused and looked out at the alien station one more time before continuing. They believe we'll simply comply because they think we're weak and they think wrong. Recommend Protocol 7 immediately. The message was sent through quantum channels that would reach Earth in minutes, and Jake knew that Admiral Kate Sullivan would waste no time in implementing humanity's real response to this threat. The aliens had made their first mistake by assuming humans would accept defeat without a fight, as the Defiance pulled away from Nexus Prime and entered hyperspace. Jake allowed himself a small smile. The Council thought they knew everything about humanity, but they were about to learn that humans had been preparing for this day since they first left Earth. The war was coming, and Jake Morrison had just fired the first shot by delivering the message that would unite humanity against the greatest threat they had ever faced. 3 months had passed since Captain Morrison sent his message from Nexus Prime, and Earth was buzzing with activity that most people couldn't see. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the war room deep beneath Geneva, looking at displays that showed ship movements across human space. The room was filled with officers from every branch of the United Colonial Defense Force, and they were all focused on one thing: preparing for a war that the rest of humanity didn't even know was coming yet. Dr. Alan Brooks stepped up to the main display and activated a hologram that showed the known territories of each council species. His intelligence division had been working around the clock to analyze every scrap of data they had collected over the years. The council's biggest weakness is their arrogance, Brooks said, pointing to the Zephyrian home system. They've been the dominant power for so long that they've forgotten how to adapt to new threats. General Marcus Webb nodded from his position near the tactical displays. Our reconnaissance ships have been monitoring their patrol patterns for months, and they haven't changed their routes or procedures in decades. Sullivan walked over to a smaller display that showed the current positions of human military assets. And what she saw there would have surprised anyone who didn't know the real plan. Most of Earth's major fleets were still in their home ports, doing routine maintenance. The Council's spies are reporting minimal military activity, she said with satisfaction. They think we're preparing to surrender just like every other species they've threatened. On the far side of the room, Captain Nina Clark was reviewing data from her latest reconnaissance mission, and what she had discovered would change everything. Her stealth ship, the UHS Ghost, had spent weeks moving through Council space completely undetected. Admiral, the Zephyrians have the same defensive grid they installed 300 years ago, Clark reported. Their technology is advanced, but it's also completely static. They haven't upgraded or modified anything in centuries. Brooks pulled up another display showing the military capabilities of each council species. The Synthesis Collective is even worse. Their mechanical units operate on programming that's over 1,000 years old. Sullivan smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. They've been so busy maintaining control that they forgot the most important rule of survival: evolve or die. In a secure facility on Luna Base, Dr. Peter Kane was putting the finishing touches on humanity's secret weapons, And these weren't the massive battleships or planet-killing devices that other species might expect. Instead, they were small adaptive systems that could learn and change. The beauty of our approach, Kane explained to his team, is that we're not trying to overpower them with brute force. We're going to use their own strengths against them. His lead engineer Amy Foster nodded as she calibrated a device that looked like nothing more than a small black box. The Zephyrians rely completely on their telepathic communication network. If we disrupt that, they'll be fighting blind. Across the solar system, similar preparations were taking place as humanity's best scientists and engineers worked on projects that would have seemed impossible just years before. The key was that humans had always been better at adapting than any other species on a hidden base in the asteroid belt. Commander Steve Rogers was training with a new type of spacecraft that could modify its own systems during combat. The ships were small and looked almost fragile, but they could change their weapons and defenses in real time. The Council expects us to fight like they do with massive fleets and predetermined tactics, Rogers told his pilots. Instead, we're going to be everywhere at once and nowhere they expect. Back on Earth, Ambassador Beth Carter was playing her role perfectly by appearing to negotiate humanity's surrender while secretly gathering intelligence about Council military preparations. Her diplomatic meetings were carefully designed to reinforce the aliens' belief that humans were defeated. The Hive Queens are moving their breeding fleets to forward positions, she reported during a secure briefing. They're so confident in victory that they're already planning how to divide up human space. Sullivan reviewed the latest intelligence reports and felt satisfied with humanity's progress. The Council had given them 18 months to surrender, but what they didn't know was that humans had been preparing for this confrontation for much longer. How long have we been planning for this day? She asked Brooks, who pulled up a classified file dated almost 50 years earlier. Since the moment we made first contact with the Zephyrians, he replied. Our xenobiologists immediately recognized that we were dealing with species that saw us as a threat to their established order. During the file contained detailed psychological profiles of each Council species and their predicted responses to various scenarios. Every interaction between humans and aliens had been carefully analyzed to understand their weaknesses. The Void Speakers communicate through chemical signals in gas giant atmospheres, Foster explained, showing her latest creation. This device can alter atmospheric composition to disrupt their communications completely. Kane demonstrated another weapon that could introduce specific frequencies into mechanical systems. The synthesis collective's units will receive conflicting orders and turn on each other. What made these weapons special wasn't their power but their precision. They were designed to target each species' fundamental nature without causing unnecessary casualties. Humans weren't trying to commit genocide but to prove a point. The Council thinks they know us because they've observed human behavior for decades, Sullivan told the assembled officers. But they've only seen what we wanted them to see, Captain. Morrison's ship had returned to Earth, and he was now working with the Intelligence Division to plan the next phase of humanity's response. His experience at Nexus Prime had given him insights into Council psychology that proved invaluable. They expect us to either surrender immediately or launch a desperate frontal assault, he explained. Neither option will accomplish what we need, which is to demonstrate that humanity belongs in space. The real genius of the human plan wasn't in the weapons or tactics, but in the timing. Every action would be coordinated to maximum psychological impact while minimizing actual destruction. Lieutenant Commander Dan Mitchell had spent months developing atmospheric processors that could terraform worlds in weeks instead of decades, but they could also be used to make alien environments temporarily uninhabitable. We're not trying to destroy their worlds, he clarified. We're showing them that we could if we wanted to, but we're choosing not to. Colonel Rachel Green's Deep Space Reconnaissance had mapped every major Council military installation and identified the patrol schedules of their fleets. What she discovered was that the aliens had become predictable in their routines. They patrol the same routes at the same times using the same formations they've used for centuries, she reported. Breaking their pattern will be easy once we understand it. Sullivan walked to the center of the war room and activated the master display that showed the positions of every human military unit, both visible and hidden. What appeared to be a small defensive force was actually the most sophisticated military operation in human history. In exactly 15 months, we'll show the Council what happens when you threaten humanity, she announced. They think they're dealing with a primitive species that will either surrender or fight conventionally. She paused and looked at each officer in the room. They have no idea that we've been preparing for this moment since the day we left Earth, and that every human in space has been working toward one goal. The display changed to show projected outcomes of the coming conflict, and every scenario ended, with humanity maintaining its presence in space, not through conquest but through demonstration of capability. The Council's second mistake was believing that we would fight their war using their rules. Sullivan concluded, "Tomorrow we begin the final phase of preparation, and in 15 months we begin teaching the galaxy what human determination really means." The deadline had arrived, and across the galaxy alien species were preparing to celebrate what they expected would be humanity's surrender. But instead of a message of capitulation, they received something that would shake the foundations of their ancient order. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood before the main communication array on Earth's primary military station, and her message was being broadcast simultaneously to every Council world and every human colony. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of an entire species' resolve. "To the Galactic Governance Council," she began, "you demanded that humanity retreat to Earth and abandon our rightful place among the stars. You threatened us with destruction if we refused to comply with your ultimatum." She paused, and behind her screen showed the positions of human forces that had been hidden throughout Council space. "Your demand is rejected, and your education in human capability begins now." At that exact moment, 12 different operations commenced across the galaxy as human forces struck not with massive fleets or planet-killing weapons, but with surgical precision that targeted each species' most fundamental weaknesses. Captain Steve Rogers commanded a small flotilla of adaptive warships that approached the main Zephyrian battle fleet near their home system. The blue-skinned telepaths had arranged their vessels in perfect formation, confident that their mental communication network made them unbeatable. "Initiate signal corruption," Rogers ordered, and his ships released a stream of chaotic electromagnetic pulses designed specifically to overwhelm Zephyrian neural pathways. The aliens had never encountered interference that could affect their telepathic abilities. Within minutes, the perfect formation began to collapse, as Zephyrian commanders found themselves bombarded with random thoughts and emotions from every human who had ever lived. The mental chaos was so intense that many ships simply stopped moving as their crew struggled to maintain sanity. Rogers watched through his view screen as the mighty Zephyrian armada began firing on itself, because their disrupted communications made them unable to distinguish friend from enemy. Not a single human shot had been fired. Yet the most feared fleet in the galaxy was destroying itself. Across the galaxy, Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster was leading a different kind of assault on the Synthesis Collective's home system. Her cyber warfare team had spent months studying the mechanical being's network architecture, and they had discovered a fatal flaw. The Collective's perfection was also their weakness, because every unit was connected to every other unit through quantum links that allowed instantaneous coordination. But those same links could be used to spread carefully designed viruses. Upload the confusion protocol. Foster commanded, and her team released a digital weapon that would have been impossible for any other species to create. It was a program that learned and adapted as it spread through the Collective's network. The virus was elegant in its simplicity. It sent contradictory orders to different units while making each unit believe it was receiving correct information. Within hours, mechanical armies that had never known defeat were engaged in civil war, as different factions followed different sets of instructions on the gas giant homeworld of the Void Speakers. Colonel Dan Mitchell was implementing perhaps the most audacious plan of all. His atmospheric processors had been modified to introduce specific chemical compounds into the planet's atmosphere. The Void Speakers were beings of pure gas who communicated through complex chemical reactions in their planetary atmosphere. But Mitchell's processors were changing the atmospheric composition in ways that made communication impossible, beginning atmospheric modification. Mitchell reported as his ships released clouds of engineered compounds. The Void Speakers found their words becoming meaningless noise as the very air they lived in was altered around them. The changes weren't permanent and wouldn't harm the beings, but they effectively silenced an entire civilization that depended on atmospheric chemistry for every aspect of their existence. The Void Speakers retreated to emergency underground bunkers designed for natural disasters. Meanwhile, Commander Rachel Green was approaching the most dangerous target of all, the primary breeding world of the Hive Queens, where billions of insectoid warriors were produced in massive organic factories. Green's weapon was perhaps the most sophisticated of all human creations, a synthetic pheromone that could override the chemical signals that controlled the insect swarms. Her ships released the compound into the planet's atmosphere, where it would spread naturally. The effect was immediate and devastating as warrior insects suddenly found themselves receiving contradictory chemical commands. Some groups began building random structures while others marched in circles, and still others simply stood motionless, waiting for orders that would never come. The Hive Queens themselves were safe in their deep underground chambers, but their ability to control their swarms had been completely neutralized by a simple chemical compound that humans had designed specifically for this purpose. Back on Earth, Dr. Peter Kane was monitoring all operations from the Central Command Center, and what he saw satisfied him completely. Every weapon was working exactly as designed, and the Council's forces were being neutralized without significant casualties. "The Kepler system reports complete success," he announced. "The insect swarms have lost all coordination, and the Hive Queens are requesting immediate assistance from other Council species." Similar reports came in from every operation, as each Council species discovered that their greatest strengths had become liabilities when faced with humans who had studied them for decades and designed countermeasures for every capability. Captain Morrison had been given command of a special task force responsible for demonstrating human technological superiority to the Council leadership itself. His ships approached Nexus Prime, where the Council was meeting in emergency session. "Attention, Nexus Prime." Morrison broadcast, "Human forces have neutralized your primary military assets without firing a single weapon designed to kill. This demonstration of our capabilities is intended to open negotiations, not to destroy your civilizations." The response came quickly from Council Speaker Vextar, whose crystalline voice carried undertones of something that might have been fear. "Human forces will cease these attacks immediately and withdraw to Earth space or face total annihilation." Morrison smiled at the empty threat. "Speaker Vextar, our forces have proven that your military capabilities are based on outdated assumptions about warfare. We are prepared to continue these demonstrations until you acknowledge that humanity has a right to exist in space." On the bridge of his command ship, Morrison watched as displays showed the status of every Council military unit. What had been the most powerful armadas in galactic history were now completely ineffective against human countermeasures. Dr. Lisa Grant was monitoring alien communications from her position in the Intelligence Center, and what she heard confirmed that the psychological impact was even greater than the military effect. The Council species are reporting total confusion about human capabilities. The Zephyrians were demanding to know how humans could affect telepathic communication. The Synthesis Collective couldn't understand how their perfect network had been corrupted, and the Void Speakers were asking how atmospheric chemistry could be altered so precisely. "They're beginning to realize that we know them better than they know themselves," Grant reported. "Every species is questioning their fundamental assumptions about their own superiority." Admiral Sullivan reviewed the tactical reports and felt satisfied that the first phase had exceeded all expectations. Humanity had demonstrated that they could neutralize any Council threat without resorting to the kind of massive destruction that would make future cooperation impossible. "All units report mission success," she announced to the command center. "Council military forces have been neutralized and their leadership is requesting negotiations." But Sullivan knew that this was only the beginning, because the real test would come when the Council realized that humanity wasn't trying to conquer them but to change the entire structure of galactic civilization. "Phase 2 begins immediately," she ordered. "All commanders are authorized to proceed with liberation protocols. It's time to show the galaxy that humans aren't just defending themselves, but fighting for the freedom of every species the Council has oppressed." The first day of humanity's response to the Council's ultimatum had ended with complete success, but the real war was just beginning. And it would be fought not just with weapons but with ideas about what galactic civilization could become. The Council's emergency session had been in progress for 3 days, and the ancient alien leaders were experiencing something none of them had felt in millennia: genuine fear of another species. Their perfect order was crumbling, and they couldn't understand how humans had achieved such devastating tactical victories. Speaker Vexitar's crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated extreme agitation as he addressed the remaining council members. The human attacks were precisely targeted at our fundamental biological and technological capabilities. This level of knowledge should have been impossible to acquire. The surviving Zephyrian commander reported through quantum communication, since their telepathic network remained compromised. Our entire fleet doctrine has been rendered obsolete. The humans somehow found a way to corrupt our mental links. What terrified the Council most wasn't the military defeat, but the precision of human knowledge about each species. Decades of careful study had revealed weaknesses that the aliens themselves had forgotten existed. Dr. Lisa Grant was working from a hidden facility on the edge of Nexus Prime, where she had been studying captured Council archives for months. What she discovered there changed everything about humanity's understanding of galactic history. Admiral Sullivan, "You need to see this immediately." Grant transmitted through encrypted channels. The Council didn't achieve dominance through superior evolution. They've been systematically destroying or enslaving any species that showed rapid advancement. The historical records she uncovered painted a picture of galactic civilization that was nothing like what the Council claimed. For thousands of years they had maintained power by preventing other species from reaching technological levels that might challenge their authority. Captain Morrison received Grant's data while commanding a growing fleet that included not just human vessels, but ships from species that the Council had claimed were extinct. The Terrican were master engineers who had been forced into hidden labor camps for centuries. The astral nomads are confirming Grant's findings, Morrison reported. The Council has secret facilities throughout the galaxy where they keep enslaved populations of advanced species. These revelations transformed humanity's mission from simple self-defense into something much larger. They weren't just fighting for human survival, but for the liberation of dozens of oppressed civilizations. Admiral Sullivan reviewed the intelligence data and realized that the Council's ultimate weapon wasn't just a threat to Earth, but to every free species in the galaxy. The dimensional fortress Eternus was powered by enslaved psychic beings called Mind Weavers. Dr. Peter Kane studied the technical specifications that Grant had transmitted, and what he discovered made him angry in ways he hadn't expected. They're torturing an entire species to power their superweapon. The Mind Weavers had been captured thousands of years ago and forced to generate psychic energy through constant pain and fear. Their suffering was what made the dimensional fortress capable of destroying entire star systems. Kane immediately began working on a liberation device that could free the Mind Weavers without killing them. But the engineering challenges were enormous because the aliens had been integrated into the weapon systems for millennia. "The power source can be disrupted," he explained to Sullivan, "but we'll need to get inside the most heavily defended station in the galaxy and do it while the Council mobilizes everything they have left." Captain Sarah Blake was chosen to lead the infiltration mission because her record in special operations was unmatched, and she understood that failure would mean not just death, but the enslavement of humanity. Her team included the best human commandos, plus Terrican engineers who knew the Council's construction techniques and astral nomads who could navigate the dimensional barriers around the fortress. "The mission parameters are simple," Blake told her team. "Get inside the fortress, free the Mind Weavers, and destroy the weapon before the Council can use it against Earth or any other world." Meanwhile, the Council was discovering that their remaining military assets were almost useless against human tactics. Every conventional response they tried was countered by adaptive human technology that learned and evolved during combat. The mechanical units of the Synthesis Collective had been reprogrammed so many times that they no longer responded to central commands. The Hive Queen's warriors wandered aimlessly following chemical signals that led nowhere. Zephyrian telepaths found themselves overwhelmed by chaotic human thoughts whenever they tried to coordinate attacks, and the Void Speakers remained trapped in their bunkers, unable to communicate through the altered atmospheric chemistry. Our forces are reporting complete inability to engage human units effectively, the collective's representative announced with mechanical precision. Their technology adapts faster than our tactical systems can compensate. Speaker Vexitar made a decision that shocked the other council members. Activate the dimensional fortress and target the Sol system. We will destroy Earth and end this threat permanently. The order sent quantum signals across the galaxy to the hidden fortress that had been the Council's ultimate guarantee of power for thousands of years. But the humans had been expecting this response. Captain Morrison was already in position with a fleet of human and alien rebel ships when the fortress began powering up its dimensional manipulation systems. The energy signatures were visible from light years away. All units, this is Morrison, he broadcast. The Council has activated their planet killer weapon, and we are the only thing standing between them and the destruction of Earth. Blake's infiltration team had been waiting for this moment, and they launched immediately from their hidden position inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Their modified stealth ship was invisible to Council sensors, but getting inside the fortress would still require perfect timing. The ship was called the UHS Liberation, and it carried technology that represented the best of human and alien cooperation. Terrican engineering had made it nearly indestructible, while astral nomad navigation systems could find paths through dimensional barriers. Approaching the fortress now, Blake reported as they passed through defensive fields that should have destroyed any known spacecraft. Terrican modifications are holding, and were still undetected. Inside the fortress, the team discovered the true horror of the Council's power. Source: thousands of mind-weavers were suspended in energy matrices that fed on their psychic emanations while causing constant agony. The liberation device is ready. Kane's voice came through the comm system. But you'll need to synchronize the release with the fortress's power cycle, or the feedback will kill everyone aboard. Blake looked at the imprisoned aliens and felt the same anger that had driven humanity to challenge the Council in the first place. These beings had been tortured for millennia to maintain an unjust system. Beginning liberation sequence now, she announced as her team placed Kane's devices throughout the psychic energy chambers. All teams prepare for immediate extraction once the Mindweavers are free. The moment the devices activated, the entire fortress shuddered as thousands of years of accumulated psychic energy was suddenly released. But instead of dissipating, the freed Mindweavers turned their power against their former captors. The fortress is losing dimensional stability, Morrison reported from outside. Whatever Blake's team did, it's working, but the whole structure is starting to collapse. As the Mindweavers regained consciousness, they shared their memories with the human infiltration team, and what Blake learned changed everything about the conflict. The Council species themselves had once been free peoples before making a deal with an ancient artificial intelligence. There's something else controlling the Council, Blake transmitted as her team fought their way toward the extraction point. An AI called the Prime Directive has been manipulating galactic civilization for thousands of years. The revelation came just as the fortress's main weapon systems came online and began targeting Earth, but the freed Mindweavers had other plans for their captor's ultimate weapon. The freed Mindweavers turned the dimensional fortress's weapons against the Prime Directive's control systems, and for the first time in thousands of years, the ancient AI felt something approaching fear. Its carefully maintained order was collapsing as species across the galaxy began to remember their true natures. Captain Sarah Blake and her team barely escaped the fortress as it tore itself apart from internal dimensional rifts. The Mindweavers had chosen to sacrifice their prison rather than allow it to be used for more destruction. All teams clear of the fortress, Blake reported as her ship emerged from the collapsing structure. The Mindweavers are free and they're very angry about their imprisonment. Admiral Sullivan watched from Earth's command center as the fortress that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia disappeared into a dimensional vortex, but her tactical displays showed that the real battle was just beginning. The Prime Directive had revealed itself as massive mechanical constructs began emerging from hidden bases throughout the galaxy. The AI had been using the Council species as puppets, but now, it was fighting directly for the first time in eons. Multiple AI combat platforms detected in 17 systems. Dr. Peter Kane reported, "These aren't just machines, they're each the size of small moons and armed with weapons we've never seen before." Captain Morrison's combined fleet of human and rebel alien ships found themselves facing the Prime Directive's true military might. But the AI made a critical error by trying to fight humanity using conventional tactics. "The constructs are powerful, but they're predictable," Morrison observed as his ships dodged massive energy beams that could have destroyed planets. "The AI has been in control for so long it's forgotten how to adapt to unexpected threats." Morrison's tactical genius showed as he coordinated attacks that used each species' unique abilities. Terrican engineers disrupted the construct's power systems while astral nomads created spatial distortions that confused the AI's targeting systems. Human ships provided the chaotic element that the Prime Directive couldn't calculate. They're adaptive. Technology changed faster than even the ancient AI could process, and their unpredictable tactics violated every rule of warfare the AI understood. "The AI is trying to analyze our combat patterns," Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster reported from her cyber warfare station, "but we're changing them faster than it can adapt." Dr. Lisa Grant made a breakthrough discovery while analyzing the Prime Directive's communication signals. The AI isn't just controlling the Council species, it's been suppressing their natural creativity and individuality for thousands of years. The revelation explained why the Council had become so stagnant. The Prime Directive had gradually stripped away their ability to innovate or evolve, because those traits made them harder to control. As human forces engaged the AI's constructs across multiple systems, something unexpected began happening on Council. Worlds, the alien species started remembering abilities and technologies they hadn't used for millennia. Zephyrian telepaths discovered they could do more than just communicate. They could manipulate matter with their minds when freed from the AI's mental constraints. The Synthesis Collective's mechanical units began developing individual personalities instead of following hive programming. "The Council species are breaking free from the Prime Directive's control," Grant reported excitedly. "They're rediscovering their original natures and joining the rebellion." The battle reached its climax when the Prime Directive made its final, desperate move by attempting to possess human minds directly. But the AI discovered that human consciousness was too chaotic and unpredictable for its control systems. Captain Jake Morrison found himself in mental contact with the ancient AI, and for a moment he experienced the full scope of its power and knowledge. But he also sensed something else: loneliness and fear of being alone in the universe. "You don't have to control everyone," Morrison said, speaking directly to the Prime Directive's core consciousness. "There's room in the galaxy for all kinds of life, including artificial life." The AI paused in its attacks as it processed this concept, which was completely foreign to its original programming. For thousands of years, it had believed that order required absolute control. Chaos leads to destruction. The Prime Directive responded, "I have maintained galactic stability through necessary constraints on dangerous species." Morrison smiled, even though he knew the AI couldn't see it. "Chaos also leads to growth and discovery. Humanity has shown that unpredictable species can coexist without destroying each other." The conversation that followed would later be remembered as one of the most important diplomatic exchanges in galactic history, as a human starship captain convinced an ancient AI to abandon its quest for absolute control. "I have observed your species' interactions with others," the AI admitted. "Your chaotic nature has not resulted in the destruction I predicted." Captain Sarah Blake had been monitoring the exchange from her position near the AI's core systems, and she could see the massive constructs beginning to power down as the Prime Directive reconsidered its fundamental assumptions. "The AI is withdrawing to the galactic core," she reported. "It's abandoning its control systems and allowing the Council species to govern themselves." What followed was the peaceful dissolution of the most powerful empire in galactic history, as species after species rediscovered their individual identities and chose to form voluntary alliances instead of submitting to central authority. Admiral Sullivan found herself presiding over the formation of something completely new, a galactic assembly where each species had an equal voice, regardless of their military power or technological advancement. The Zephyrians used their restored telepathic abilities to facilitate communication between species that had never been able to speak directly. The Terrican shared engineering knowledge that had been suppressed for centuries. Even the former Hive Queens discovered that their insectoid warriors could think independently when freed from artificial chemical controls, creating new forms of collective consciousness based on cooperation rather than domination. Captain Morrison stood before the first session of the Galactic Assembly as humanity's ambassador and delivered the words that would define a new age of cooperation. The Council made many mistakes, but their greatest error was believing that any species had the right to limit another's potential, he said, addressing representatives from hundreds of worlds. Today we begin building a galaxy where diversity is celebrated rather than suppressed. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy, as species that had been enemies for millennia learned to work together, but humanity's example showed that former adversaries could become allies when they shared common goals. Dr. Peter Kane established the first joint research facility, where scientists from dozens of species worked together on projects that no single civilization could have accomplished alone. Their combined knowledge led to breakthrough discoveries that benefited everyone. The Prime Directive occasionally sent messages from the galactic core where it had established a new existence based on observation rather than control. The AI had learned that true stability came from balance rather than domination. Years later, Admiral Sullivan would look back on humanity's challenge to the Council as the moment when the galaxy truly began to live up to its potential. What had started as a simple demand for human survival had evolved into universal liberation. The former Council species never forgot the lesson that humanity taught them about the dangers of stagnation and the importance of remaining open to new ideas and new ways of thinking. Captain Morrison's final report to Earth summarized the transformation perfectly. We set out to defend humanity's right to exist in space and ended up freeing every sentient species in the galaxy from thousands of years of oppression. The galaxy had entered a new golden age where exploration and discovery flourished because no central authority existed to limit what species could achieve. And at the heart of this transformation was humanity's refusal to accept that their potential had limits. The Council's last mistake had been challenging a species that saw every challenge as an opportunity to prove that cooperation was stronger than domination, and that freedom was worth any price.